Okay, with this we come to the last session for the day. Today we are having a panel discussion from Delhi chapter, role of testing in digital transformation. This will be moderated by Gunjan Kaushik and panelists are Harpreet Singh and Sunil Bose. So before starting the session, let me thank our founding sponsor, Innovation Roots. Innovation Roots is a leading consulting and training service provider helping organizations to achieve business agility and beyond. It is one of the leaders and pioneers of niche publishing services and well known for content collaboration with global thought leaders, authors, and creators. For more details about Innovation Route, request you to visit www.innovationroutes.com. Do's and don'ts. Yes, please do join 5 minutes early as you have been doing. Use high quality wrists and headphones for better sound quality. Please keep your microphones muted and video disabled as this may cause disturbance. Please post your questions in the chat box. It would be taken by the facilitators or moderator, which will help you to read out the questions. Please fill the feedback forms after the event to help us to understand about the event management and the other sessions which we will be looking forward to take it in future. We appreciate your cooperation. With this, I welcome Gunjan to take over from here.
Thank you, Prashant. Okay, so good evening to all. Today we will be discussing about the role of testing in digital transformation, and we have with us Mr. Harpreet Singh and Mr. Sunil Bose. So, Harpreet, could you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. And I hope you all enjoyed all other sessions. So, uh, I have more than 25 years of experience in software development, project management, and agile coaching. And I have been involved with a lot of presentations, paper presentation, paper writing into the agility or into the digital transformation, and these days into the cloud implementation. So I work for Assistance International, and I think this is the basic information to start with, and we can continue. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Harpreet. Sunil, could you please take over?
Sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, I deeply thanks Agile Network India for giving me this opportunity. And about me, I'm currently working as a engineering director of engineering in Bharat Pay, and I'm a proud father. I have about 12 plus years of experience in the industry across various levels of testing, and I love to travel. I love to do do a lot of try out a lot of cuisines. You can call me a foodie also, and I love to keep myself acknowledged and abreast with everything that is coming new in the technology domain. And that's pretty much with me to start with. And this is my um, first panel discussion. So looking forward.
Thank you, Sunil. So, talking about myself, I am a test engineer and I have more than 9 years of experience. I've worked on different domains like SCM healthcare and right now in fintech. And I write blogs for testing and automation tools and its practices on tools, QA, and Lambda tests. Apart from all this, I try to learn from whatever is happening around me. Maybe today is the right chance to explore more about the latest things that are happening around us in the IT domain specifically. So let us just begin with the discussion. But before that, I would like to set the context for our discussion. So we'll be talking about digital transformation. So what exactly is digital transformation? So it is more of a necessary transition that every business is doing right now to facilitate their growth. Now the companies are having extensive dependency on softwares, websites, and other applications for their business process as well as their routine operations. To maintain and stabilize all this, The digital environment is to be very robust, and it is very important for the IT managers as well as the QA to speed up the process and deliver high quality code. With this digital tsunami, the testing process and the software development life cycle has marginally evolved. Today, we will discuss what role testing plays and the impact digital transformation has made on this testing process. So without wasting any more time, let us start with our first question, which is for Harpreet. We would like you to answer that. What do you think is the importance of communication for a tester?
Yeah, communication, I would say it's important not only for the tester, but each and every stakeholder within the project. So for the tester, it becomes more important, more critical, because tester need to get and provide right information to right stakeholder at the right time. Right? So if there is some ambiguity in the requirement or ambiguity in the business understanding, then definitely that needs to be propagated to the proper stakeholder at a right amount of time, at the right time, right? And most of the time I have seen there is some ambiguity, and the proactiveness is not being shown from the development team, and they have just because the problem with the communication is the misunderstanding or the thinking that the communication has been achieved, right? But actually sometimes it is not, right? So communication is not achieved, but we assume, okay, this has been achieved, or whatever we think, the same way the stakeholder think about a requirement, about a business functionality, about a technology, or about any kind of assumption. So having said that, it's just like old ambiguity statement when we say, okay, flying plane is dangerous, right? So a lot of ambiguity in that phrase. So flying plane is dangerous for the people sitting in their home, or flying plane is dangerous for the people sitting in the plane, or the uh, plane is dangerous to fly, something like that. So everyone will assume their understanding of a certain requirement, certain business scenario, certain use case, right? So that need to be proactively clarified, and that is I think the most important for the tester, because if we skip that part from the testing point of view, definitely it is going to make its way into the production and disturb the entire system. So that's my take on that.
Thank you, Harpreet. Sumit, would you like to add something to it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a very, very valid point Harpreet has taken out. I mean, of course, communication plays more often than not, communication plays the most important, aspect of delivering any software or making any project viable for production, or even for a beta release to end customers. But what I really want to stress upon here is that, so as testers, mostly all of us, mostly everyone in the industry, we are uh, we are mostly working as good collaborators. So there is a fine line difference between being collaborative and being communicative. So whatever we are doing right now to gel with the product team, to gel with the end customer or the customer support, all of those activities that we're doing, finding bugs and helping them reproduce issues, that is all collaboration. That's something that I needed to be very clearly put out, so that everyone understands what do we really mean by communication. So communication and collaboration are two different things. They go hand in hand, but then communication takes way more importance as a role of in the role of a tester, is because if you're not able to clearly communicate the idea or a bug or a scenario or or even a risk that you're feeling while testing or before testing itself, then then it kind of defeats the purpose of achieving quality with the release delivery timelines. So communication plays a pivotal role, and especially with digital transformation projects, especially like when people are moving from cloud native from native to cloud, or monolith to microservice. I'm sure a lot of us um, testers have gone through those phases in their own organizations in their own different ways, where monolith systems are broken down into microservices. And the moment that happens, a team is obviously broken down into silos or squads or pods, pods, whatever fancy name we want to provide to that particular team working on a certain different microservice. And that's where the communication plays more important role to make everyone else aware about everything else that is happening with everything, and that helps to keep everything in context as well. So yeah, so adding to what Harpreet had said, that communicating certain ideas or statements via a tester is very important, between teams is very important. But then we need to really understand that are we really communicating or are we really collaborating? So collaborations are something that testers are very good at. We are doing that already. We are already taking all the risk items to the developers, to the product manager, or even the stakeholders, every other stakeholder in business. But then are we really communicating well? So that's a question that we need to ask ourselves, and that's something that we need to really focus on. And that's the most sought after skill that every manager, every QA manager or every leadership should sort after, should think of while hiring someone in their teams.
Thank you so much, Sumit. So we can say that communication plays a very important role in waiving off any ambiguity and to keep everyone on the same page wherever they are placed or wherever they are sitting. For the successful delivery of a project, communication has to be very precise and clear. So, and what do you think that the testing approach has changed or would further change with this digital transformation or the movement? What are your thoughts on that? Harpreet, could you please throw some light on it?
Yeah. So when we say the testing approach for the digital transformation, uh, so we can relate it to some navigation system, right? So only difference I can see, or only innovation that we need to put into testing is looking at the big picture, right? So let me give you an example of navigation. So for example, in the traditional navigation, we say if we want to go to some place, so we drive, we just rely upon the road signs. Road sign says the airport direction, they say like next sign, a left sign, so you turn left. And then again there is next road sign is there, so we follow that sign, and just following those sign, we reach our destination. But the problem with this approach is we lose track of the big picture. We just focus on those signs. So for example, if traveling by this traditional way, if I turn on my navigation, so that will give me like where am I, where I am going, what are other places behind around me, how is the traffic, and what are the alternate route that I should follow, right? So similarly, when we say the testing in a bigger system, in a where we are talking about the complete digital transformation of a of an end customer or an enterprise, then definitely tester, developer, everybody, they should take care of that big picture, like where this particular system that one tester or the piece of functionality that tester is testing will get fit into the enterprise, right? So if we keep track, because this kind of requirement is not mentioned in our user story, in our use case, or any of the documentation. So this is what we have. We need to just uh, set our thinking at par with the stakeholders or the thinking of the business people, right? So that we can think, okay, as a tester, so this is where my piece of work will going to integrate, and these are the stakeholder, or these are the beneficiary for this work. So if we think about that, then definitely there would be innovation. The tester would be more proactive in giving their feedback, or raising the problematic scenario very early in the testing. So my take on this is like we should take off that big picture, because these days the functionality that one tester is testing might be the one part of the functionality will integrate with some SAP system, or maybe some CRM system, or any third party system, or some legacy system, right? So those kind of information we should gather, and we should keep track of those kind of integration things. Like although the integration is not in the current scope for a tester, but still we need to know that big picture. So that so one word answer to this digital transformation and the testing changes or challenges is the understanding and keeping track of the big picture. So that's my take on this.
Thank you, Harpreet.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sumit, would you like to add?
That's very rightly said. Although, I mean, yeah, I mean, every other software delivery project that we have seen in our past, um, and I'm sure some of us would agree to what I'm going to say next is, but then every software delivery that we've made in the past, losing the big picture has always been the problem with different software teams or different silo teams working on different aspects of a module, even if they're not like working on some component. Some of the teams are actually working on some sub solution level in, and this especially happens a lot in the service based industry where a larger problem is broken down into smaller code, like coding problems, and then they are kind of offshored into some different silo teams, which is very different from what happens in a startup, in a regular startup, at least in Bharat Pay or any other scaling startup that we are trying to work achieving scale. The approach in testing that has changed. So there is that. So let's not confuse what innovations have happened in testing in the last few years. There have been there's been a like exponential number of things that have happened. Until 10 years back, until then, record and play was the only viable option left for a lot of testers who wanted to automate stuff, their user stories or their and end to end automation used to be the thing, uh, which kind of grew from Selenium WebDriver came in, and a lot of other changes happened. Um, Data-driven frameworks were developed, then POM-based frameworks were developed, and so these innovations kept happening. So let's not confuse what innovations have happened and how are we using those innovations to test while a project is going under uh, under a phase of digital transformation. So let's take a very simple example of a lot of people might have seen this shift in the industry while testing Android or being in Android or iOS mobile application testing, would have seen that a lot of organizations are actually switching to have actually already switched to React based applications where the business does not have to really worry about delivering different code bases for different platforms. And ever increasing complexity has also decreased. So this is also a kind of digital transformation that has happened. But how does it change the strategy or the test strategy of a tester? It is for a tester earlier, in the earlier scenarios when native was very prevalent, let's say. So a person or testing team would have to test all the feature sets, all the test cases they have to run on Android and on iOS just to make sure everything works fine. So this is not compatibility. So now with React into the advent, the only picture left is compatibility. So you test anything on Android or on iOS with React working under the hood, you only have to do compatibility testing or browser-based compatibility or device compatibility. Or to the max, I would say in a very tight situation, you would also take care of previous Android versions or previous iOS versions, but then you would only run like a very small number of those test cases on a different platform altogether. So that's a huge strategic shift from testing taking all my 1,000 test cases to Android and all those 1,000 cases um to iOS. And this is just execution. So while strategizing also, there would be a lot of test cases would be different for Android. So there would be specific Android cases, like the way Android gives permissions to a certain application, the way iOS gives permissions to a certain application. So those test cases would always be different. So now only those compatible level test cases are there, and a few UI based test cases you can run on iOS. So obviously the strategy can be different for everyone else. This is how I like to move forward with my testing or with my team's testing. But then this is a strategic change that has happened. Also, I would also say that when we talk about microservices, and I'm kind of extrapolating what Harpreet just said, that losing the big picture. So when we move from a monolith system the only way to test for an automation engineer or a test engineer, I would not call automation engineer, only way to automate your tests or just run your tests uh, in a monolithic system is end to end. You cannot just focus on some certain area of the application and make sure that and just forget about rest of the parts of the application, that whether they're working or not, I can create a mock or whatever. For monolith applications, you have to make sure that every other component is working so that I can test this one component that I want to make live. So this has changed. With microservices, you can only test login or authorization services and then make them live. But then, coming to Harpreet's point, the real agenda of book big picture, whether the user is able to successfully sign up and see the dashboard, that user story kind of gets defined, or that use case kind of gets defined when the test strategy is only focused on one particular component and making that particular component live. And that's where system testing or integration testing plays a major role now. I think that plays a major role because in my previous 10, 12 years of career aspect, I've not seen a lot of testers in startups doing specific system level tests or writing system level tests, not even executing them. So, but right now, this has changed a lot. The tester has to make sure if the auth service is working fine, then they have to make sure that the home page is also working nicely. At least it is landing on the right home page for the user. So the system level tests or the integration tests, they've taken more priority rather than end-to-end tests that were the thing in the past. That's definitely a thing of the past.
Thank you. I think that pretty much sums up what answer we were seeking. So, and in continuation to it, we all know that organizations are moving to agile processes where releases happen almost every day. So, how do you think testing can be optimized for manual or as well as automated scenarios, giving you have builds to be released to production, you have QA sign off to be given? So, what do you think should happen there?
Okay,
Sunit, if you could continue.
sure. Um, So this is a question that I've had a lot of times in my that this has crossed a lot of times in my head, and a lot of times I've had a um, discussion with my peers and my leads and managers about it. And what I feel is that, and especially in our ecosystem, the startup ecosystem that I've seen, is that people focus a lot on testing, but then the real answer for delivering faster or testing faster is to hire a tester or a high or hire or hire automation or SDET. That is the keyword, that being the keyword. So what I feel is that if we are moving, and it's not an if, it's a big yes, that we are moving to agile and we are making daily releases, the testing process has to evolve itself a lot more than just handing over builds to QA and then making sure that QA delivers properly on time. So that has, I guess, that is what we are actually working on in BharatPe, to make testing a more integral part and not just some team's effort, like not an onus of a team, of testing team or a quality assurance team or SDET, to make sure that whatever was working is working fine. So that has to be a collaborative effort, and that is exactly what we are working on in BharatPe, to be very precise, that we want people to make sure that whatever code, whatever designs are being created, they are bug free. We're trying to entice and encourage more people to ensure the delivery of the product is almost production ready at all times. That kind of, the real role of testing has to be defined by leaders and people like us in the industry, to make people understand that testing is not just pushing your builds to production. And this is a favorite line of mine to my team members, that most of the testers nowadays are release engineers. They're not really testing anything. They're making sure a release happens by following a certain checklist that their managers or their leads have given them, or they have created for themselves. So we have to move forward from being just the release checklist engineer to a quality assurance engineer, and we have to make sure that our not just our practices are on board. In fact, the developer also is following the right practice or the right set of practices, and for that we need to be self-aware about what better development practices or DevOps practices are there. So there is a fine line between understanding them and knowing them.
Thank you, Sunit. Harpreet, would you like to add something to it?
Yeah, definitely. So uh, that uh, that kind of thing, like the testing that needs to be uh, it's not owning the thing. If we are not just owning that particular piece of test case, but at the same time we own uh, on the backend business also. So we have ownership of the testing as well as like where this is going to be going to get connected. So that kind of thing that should be there. So be it of a monolithic design or microservices or any kind of thing. Because the problem with these days, we rely upon infrastructure. We rely upon the cloud. We say, okay, look, we have the scalable infrastructure, so that is fine. But the problem is the infrastructure we can get, but that kind of testing has to be completed before we say, okay, we have the scalable infrastructure. Our system is not ready to scale technically it has not been tested that way, but we rely upon the infrastructure. So that's the some mismatch between the expectation and the expenses that companies are making on the cloud infrastructure, but at the same time they are not aligning the testing effort accordingly to that scalable system. So that's another thing I think I would like to add here.
Thank you, Harpreet. I think most of us would agree to what you both have said. In the race to finish up our releases, we often become release engineers and not the QA engineers, which we really are. So, saying that, Harpreet, you were telling about the test environment or the test infrastructure that has been changing. So, for sure, that has impacted the digital transformation. So, Sunit, what do you say? How the test environment or the configurations that we build for whatever sort of test environment that we are trying to create is being impacted because of all that?
Sure. So, okay. So with any scaled or scaling system that I have worked with previously, the majority of the problem lies with while testing, whenever a drop arrives for testing or or verification, whenever a drop arrives for verification. The, if not 90%, I would say 70 to 80% of the problems lie with the region or the environment. That certain environment is not working, or certain staging is not working, or someone else's code was deployed and this particular check-in or checkout was not right, or the configuration was missing, or even the DB server has somehow crashed or something like that. So these things have happened in the past, and these are the major reasons why, most of the testers, kind of lose a lot of their footing of the um, estimates that they have provided for testing a particular task. So let's say, so the reason behind that is absolutely not something that is in testers' hands, or a tester can help. It is again a collaborative effort of every system, that when you are trying to develop something, or when we are trying to build something, it is not only the production that we need to maintain, it is also our internal environments that we have to, kind of work on towards. So one good thing that was there in one of my previous organizations, which is Paytm, was that we maintained, with some of the teams, they maintained 99.9% availability of uptime, and for internal reasons. And that kind of commitment from a team, or coming from a team, or being in the team itself, gives, pushes everyone the right direction, so that these things do not affect. So let's say I had a very different conversation with one of my EM managers, whose system went down, because of some XYZ reason, and there was a very critical component of the release. And what happens is, again, coming to that big picture, or point that Harpreet just raised few minutes back, everyone kind of feels that their system is up and running in production, and staging is not really their problem or their issue. But what happens is that, if let's say 100 engineers are working with that system that you own, or that X person owns, and if that particular environment goes down for, let's say, an hour, so we have kind of lost 100 hours of productive time. That that understanding is there. Definitely, everyone understands that every team is down because of my system, but then taking ownership and acknowledging that fact is still missing. So whether we go into digital transformations, whether we do not go into digital transformations, owning your own environment is very important for every other team. And most of the times I've seen that test environment, he to head tester can take care of it. So I am kind of very against with that fact. Everyone has their own role to play. Collaborating with someone does not mean taking over someone else's responsibilities and making them their own. So test environments have to be test. So let's call it an environment. Let's not even call it a test environment. If we cannot, I have a very strong opinion about internal environments, and that is if I cannot maintain and upkeep my internal environments, how can I make sure that my team is committed to my production at all times? So something that I have to use, that is my personal hygiene. If I cannot maintain my own personal hygiene, how can I make sure my customer's hygiene is maintained? So that is very important for every leader in the industry to understand and acknowledge as well.
Thanks, Sunit. That's a very good example that you've given regarding maintaining the personal hygiene, be it your environment or any other strategy that you're implementing. Harpreet, would you like to add something to this?
Yes, definitely. On the same line, I remember like around 15 years ago, there was one project, and there were some issues during our internal testing, and we used to have our PMO team, QMS team, right? So they come and they just bother project manager and the team lead on some of the CMMI practices. So they say, okay, where is your root cause analysis? Where is all the documentation? Lot of things, right? So I was working on that project, and they asked me, where is your root cause analysis? So that gave me an idea. Like, we have been doing root cause analysis just to show them, okay, we have been doing, but let's do it with due diligence. So then we just sit together for an hour, and we look at the bugs that are coming. So we are saying, like, uh, we are not taking out or pinpointing defects from the team member. We are getting the defects from the software, right? And we are just checking like how we can improve upon that. And within 1 hour of discussion, we identified like around 80%. So that was typically we just run those Pareto chart 80-20 rule, and we come across that 80% of the defects are just because they were logged. So two reasons. One was the problem with the test environment. Test environment was not the sanity check was not done before giving it to the test team. There was some problem, maybe the database script was not updated, or there was some DLL was missing, or some JSON or other XML file was not available to test the application, right? So those kind of things we come across. Okay, 80% of the defect that we receive during first couple of days of testing are primarily due to the environment. Then we just thought about this, and then we try to automate our build process, right? So that the build is automated, and we need only just to change the script, like what our settings are there, so that will be doing. So that helped a lot. And definitely the environment is something that it's like we cannot take it for granted. Okay, we are doing it, we are doing the testing for the internal purpose. This code is not going into the production, so we can, so we should not think, okay, when there is any problem, some developer can come and fix that immediately, and then they can, any showstoppers or tester can continue testing on that. So that should not happen, and we should take some time. Maybe we can delay. So delaying the testing for couple of hours is better than testing in a bad environment or testing in an environment which is not good, because that will just create a chaos that will inject more bugs in our bug tracker system. So the people, so next day the developer, they will come, they will just, their intention will be just to close the numbers. The tester's intention will be just to log the test into our bug tracker, right? So those kind of things, like we are just, the team is playing on their own just because the test environment is not healthy. So that is for sure, like we need to pay our attention onto the test environment. So it's like about the net practice our player do, right? So we need to do the due diligence in the test environment when we test for our internal purpose. So that's my take. Thank you.
Thanks, Arpit. I totally agree with that. I myself have experienced that the sanity of test environment is really important while giving any kind of sign off. Facing the bugs in the production is way more costly than getting them resolved in the test environment itself. So, if we
Just
talk about the non-func,
one thing I wanted to add, and this is like kind of a message for all the testers out there, is and it makes sense for everyone who's testing an application. And this is I've felt personally, and I've given this feedback to my team as well, that whenever you see that there is an environment issue and it's clearly an environment issue, a lot of times testers don't understand, or the testing team, especially the junior testers who have just started off their careers, who do not understand the nitty-gritties of an architecture or a system or whatever, or a URL. So they kind of start off, you know, foraying into list of issues on Jira and trying to create that huge list of Jira tickets. Just I want them to understand, to have that cognizance, and that cognizance will only build over time. But this is just a message for everyone who kind of does that, or if people in their team are doing that, I would like them to not stop doing that. They need to log those issues. If they still we cannot ask our teams to stop logging issues because there was an environment issue and then ask them not to. Let them learn, let them fall, make them understand that this was an environment issue, and then probably by their own, let them help them to build their own cognizance. That's what I kind of do. Do not stop them to log Jiras, because that kind of hardwires that situation in their head that if there is an environment issue, I don't need to log a Jira, and that can be a bigger disaster. So I would like everyone to, whoever is here, this is kind of humble message to all of those leaders and managers, so that you know build cognizance into your team to make them aware about these kind of issues here.
I think, Sumit, that's a very good point that you have brought up. So, next, I'd like to ask about the non-functional testing. It's always an important part of any test strategy. So, what are your thoughts on how these areas have been impacted with the digital transformation, the non-functional testing parts? Harpreet, would you like to answer that?
Yeah. So the non-functional requirements are important, and they are first requirement to miss out, right? Because when there is a time crunch or increase in scope or increase expectations from the customer, then these are the requirement that most likely to be missed. These days we talk about cloud deployment, and so one of the thing is uh, we say like sometimes we need to learn to test the non-functional requirement. So these days the security testing is something that is done only when there is some third party integration requirement, right? As Sunit say, like he worked with the Paytm, Bharat Pay, so those kind of organizations. So they are like very 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 picky on the security thing, right? So the security testing is like is very prime in finance or those kind of payment domains. But not only for the finance and payments. So in any system the security testing is required, and interestingly that need to be learned and that needs to be taught to the testing team, to the development team. Like these are the ways. So we definitely, I would recommend, like if we have such requirement, then definitely the team need to be trained on, at least on the security, on the auditing, on the possible hacks, right? So this is the area where we just rely upon the standard testing. So at least we should cover the areas which are there, which are documented from the different service provider. So those kind of testing should be there, and it has to be learned, it has to be trained, and it should be discussed among the team member, right? So that is one thing. And then we talk about the scalability, we talk about the performance of the system. So again, I will repeat my last point, where when I said, okay, the we need to we expect our system to scale. We can get our our hardware dynamically. We can have those kind of load balancer, or we can just increment our deployment in production dynamically. That is okay. But definitely before that, we need to test the load testing with with the appropriate tools. Okay, whether our system is able to take that kind of load or not. So most of the time, the very tricky thing is to find the bottleneck. So these days we talk about the microservices. We say, okay, microservices we can scale. So even if in the distributed architecture, in the microservices architecture, so we have containers and applications are different functionalities are running in the different container. But most of the time when we deploy those application and move into the production, at that time we realize, okay, there are few bottlenecks are available, and those are causing problem with the system. That cannot be replicated when we test locally, because we are just testing one system at a time. So we are just doing the performance testing. So even if those bottleneck we cannot scale, so there could be some services, some microservices which cannot scale, or there could be some integration with some third party or some legacy tool which we cannot scale, or there could be some service which is not available for the scaling. So only one instance can be run, or there could be database, or one instance of the database can be run, right? So those kind of things, those kind of bottleneck point, we need to identify, and we need to test those point for for the performance and for the load testing, so that we know at one fine day if we need to scale those rest of the component. So the component which has the bottleneck, that should not break, that should perform even in those worst condition. So that kind of analysis has to be done before we think about the scaling, before we think about the performance testing. So that's my understanding on this.
Yes, thank you, Harpreet. Sunit, would you like to add something else?
Sure, sure. So just like functional testing, I mean, and that is a very valid point that Harpreet raised, that non-functional use cases are the last most commonly found use cases during any software release, any release for that matter. We kind of, it is too late in the cycle usually to understand that, okay, we have a performance bottleneck or we have a security bottleneck. So again, so I'll put 2 points here, like two references here from my previous, like from like 5 minutes back. Once I said that we need to make sure that we need to entice and encourage people to make sure security is the priority. So whenever we are trying to develop a piece of code, so there is a lot of at least a basic level of security testing, starting from SAST, like static analysis or like that. We can have those third-party aggregators to help us out, like SonarQube or check marks or anything else, or any other commonly provided service. So if we kind of make sure that these are not part of, explicit requirements, something that someone has to tell us to, and then only we can understand, or it is too late in the cycle for us to visualize this change is going to impact security. So if we are going to again make that as more like a um, not just a requirement, but a benchmark, I would say. If kind of make those things as benchmarks in our execution cycles also already, these things would be least of our worries in the future, even while going to production, or not even uh, even after keeping the production code not updated for like long. So these things can have help. So similar things with the performance cases. If we are making sure that individual APIs that are being tested now, we can go on and talk a lot about how we are going to scale our systems, and how individual scale is important, individual API scale is important, rather than, or which is more important, individual API to scale, or this complete service itself needs to scale. So we can, these are like, would be digressing from the discussions, but then if we are at least making sure that individual API is performing at 200 or below 200 ms, or let's say 100 ms, and it stays that way, and we ensure that we're using our automated build processes, which have been just mentioned, which kind of referred to. So if you're going to maintain those things and those benchmarks, and that we give, and we do not give that benchmark adherence to a certain team like quality assurance, or to, engineering manager or whoever is responsible. We don't make that responsibility a part of a person, but as a part of a team or a part of an execution cycle, then I guess these things would solve a lot. But then what is that what is that the paradigm shift that has happened with digital transformations? Let me talk a little bit more on that. Is that with changing, and I've seen a lot of, and when I say digital transformations, it's not just monolith to MS microservices. I've not seen, but I've read blogs where people have moved to microservices and moved back to monoliths because that solves their problem more than, in terms of cost or in terms of availability or whatever. The monolith systems have helped them better. So that is also another. So that's also a digital transformation. Going from microservices to monolith is also a digital transformation. So let's not confuse ourselves here that monolith to microservices is the only way of transforming digitally, or from native to React is transforming digitally. So I just wanted to clear that air here. So how does that transformation, how making these transformation have changed the strategy in non-functional test cases while doing non-functional? So I guess the major paradigm shift that has happened is uh, because systems have kind of become self-sustainable and self-deployable. These questions are asked way much more further in the cycle, not just at the requirement stage, but actually at the inception stage of a new microservice or a new system altogether. These questions are asked and answered then and there, rather than building them and thinking of them later, somewhere in later stages. Maybe these questions are not, they're answered but not executed in the same way, but then the development of that particular system or the testing of that particular system happens in a way that these are certain ideas that we need to adhere to. We cannot let user, if even if we're changing microservices to, let's say we've created a new auth service, the basic idea that I cannot log in with my username and Gunjan's password, that is a basic security check. So earlier these cases would used to kind of slip through. Maybe I'm just giving a maybe a weird example, but I'm trying to pitch in here. So these things are already taken care of while making new services or new systems, designing new systems at the design level itself. This is for security and everything, but then performance, what about performance? So these bottlenecks are identified way much more earlier when we are working with smaller system and smaller pieces of code. These are already tackled. So one good thing that I like about these transformation projects, and I've had a couple of handful with my career, and what I like about these transformations is that I have an open playground. I have like I can sit at one point in time, even if I don't understand the complete architecture of the system, I can um, at least have a mind map in my head to what all not scenarios, but what all modules I need to test, like what all levels of testing and what all, like I have a map that I can make against all the levels of testing that I have to do, and what all scenarios I can do in those levels of testing. So that's the kind of agility that provides that the growth of a tester really matters there. Because if you start to understand these nitty-gritties of the system way beforehand, I guess that's where you win while making while transforming digitally. That's my take.
Thank you, Sunit and Harpreet. That was really insightful. So before we close up, we have questions in the chat window. So if you would like to take those up.
Okay, the um,
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
what
You
is your
may.
take? Yeah, so Amar has asked that what is our take on DevOps managing all environments currently in Agile? Very good question, Amar. Um, I think my take here is that it's still the same as I mentioned earlier, is that if I'm aware of how DevOps works and what are the best practices that DevOps has, does not make me a DevOps. The fine lines and the fine details still lies with the DevOps. The expertise still lies with the DevOps. The availability of an infrastructure at a internal region or internal level should always lie with DevOps. Because if you hand over the product to me, or the code base, or if you're using infrastructure as a code or whatever, or Kubernetes clusters, and we are managing, and the testing team or the development starts to manage it, they're going to mold that environment there in their own possible way to make their own code working or their own project move forward. And that kind of defeats the whole point of having homogeneity across levels. I think uh, we can come to a middle ground where access can be revoked or access can be limited while managing the environments. Like there are certain pieces of types of tasks that the DevOps can only ask do, and certain types of things that you can give access to other people, like changing a mere URL to some other uh, system, very vague. But then changing access credentials or providing public keys or editing public keys to create more accesses, I guess that's not something that anyone else should have the access to. And I'm very subjective here, being very subjective here, and what you can provide access for or what you can manage as a DevOps for internal regions or production is totally and entirely up to your quality guidelines that you have built for your team, for your team, not exactly for your team, but uh, for the company as the DevOps team. I hope that answers your question, Amar.
Thank you, Sumit. Harpreet, would you like to add something?
Dev test don't
Yeah.
like DevOps team.
Yeah.
I mean, I love DevOps. I would love to connect with you and know more about DevOps, but this has not been the case with me or my team members. We love to run around DevOps. So yeah,
Yeah, actually, the thing is, when we say it's the same thing that sometimes developer they don't like testers. It's a tester they don't like the business users because they change the requirement, and the tester they find bug in the developer. Sometimes they don't find bug in the developed code, but they developer think they are finding bug in us, right? Something like that. So that should go on. So that's why we need to have that kind of ecosystem, which is totally value driven, not the people driven, right? So we just talk about something which is we only respect the working software. Like if something is not working, then there is problem, right? So regarding the DevOps, they are taking charge of everything for all kind of development. So that is okay. Like only thing is we need to automate those kind of things. So we have those kind of script based deployment ready, right? For all the YAML file or every all the cloud deployment or those container creation, everything. If we have documented, we have those kind of scripted, and we have that kind of transparency, like what exactly we are going to get in this kind of environment. So then I think that is clear. So to overcome this kind of mistrust between the team, between the developer, tester, and the DevOps, so only thing is that the thing should be transparent, things should be documented, things should be discussed. Okay, this is what we are going to do, and this is how we are going to do. If we discuss these two questions among the teams, whether it's a developer, tester, or the DevOps, or any business user, then definitely we increase the transparency, and we definitely, when we increase the transparency, we increase the trust. So that is the key here, to be more collaborative.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harpreet, and thank you, Sumit, for such insightful thoughts. So I think Prashant, would you like to take over now?
Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you, Sunit. Thank you, Harpreet, for a insightful session. So it was a great discussion. I hope the community people had a good insight over the testing part.